In this video, we're going to discuss more about the top 6 reasons why you should not become an auditor in public accounting. My name is Arielle. I'm a certified public accountant in the state of Florida. I have several years of experience combined in industry and the world of public accounting. And so I'm making this video to discuss some of those reasons why you may not want to consider a job as an auditor for those of you who are considering it. So first of all, when I am referring to auditor, I'm not to be confused with an IRS tax auditor. I'm talking about auditors in the public accounting sphere who work for CPA firms, who go to a variety of different clients reviewing financials, who have been hired by those companies to receive an audit for whatever reason, whether that's because of required regulations or for other business purposes that they're requesting an audit. And so a couple different things I want to discuss with you today, things that you should definitely consider if you are considering becoming an auditor, so that way you can make an informed opinion. This video is not to dissuade you from becoming an auditor, but just to make sure that you understand some of those realities. So the very first reason why you may not want to become an auditor is because you may be considered to work quite a few hours. In today's world, I think work-life balance has been discussed more and more and more. And this can be a real struggle if you become an auditor. So auditors typically have certain seasons or certain times of the year where they're more busy than others, often what is referred to as busy season. And so busy season is essentially the time, at least for an auditor, when you'll have the majority of your work throughout the year due to what causes this is that when you're an auditor, you are reviewing financials of various companies, and you usually do it after their year end. For most individuals, when we're thinking of things like taxes, we usually have a calendar year end, December 31st. Now, for businesses, those year ends can vary. Some might have like a March 31st year end, might have a June 30th year end. Others might have an actual calendar year end. I work with a lot of nonprofit clients, and they have a lot of like 6/30 year ends or 9/30 year ends. And so what this means is that, once they have that year end, it's usually within a couple months after that we begin those audits. And then depending on what industries you work with, there may be various deadlines where those are due within a certain amount of months after their year end. And so what this means is, depending on your clientele, you may have quite a few different jobs that you have to review and that have hard deadlines over a short amount of time. And so what this means is oftentimes during certain times of years, you're definitely going to be working over 40 hours a week. Now, this is going to really depend again on your industry. It's also going to depend on the size of firm that you work at. If you work at a large firm, like a Big Four firm, usually the expectation is to work quite a few more hours, whether that's 50, 60, 70, 80 plus hours a week. Typically at smaller firms, that could be less. I know sometimes, and it really ranges to, if you're working on like SEC, like public companies, oftentimes that can require more hours depending on what you're doing. So it really does depend, but in general, during certain times of the year, you're definitely going to be required to work over 40 hours. Now, I know some firms during other times of the year, you may be able to work less than 40 hours, but many firms still require you to at least work 40 hours. So you're working 40 hours during certain times, during the less busy times of year, and then you're working, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours during the busier times. And that is usually not with any kind of overtime pay. So that's something to be considered. Most auditors, at least in the United States, are often considered exempt employees. And so what this means is that because their job is expected to fluctuate when they're busy, where they're required to work more during certain times, it takes into this account where they're not required to pay overtime for that. And so usually most of those people are going to be salaried. So whether you're working an 8-hour work week or a 40-hour work week, you're getting paid the same. And so if this is something that does not appeal to you, that is definitely something to consider. And again, that's not going to be at every single firm, but it's definitely a reason why public accounting is definitely not for everyone. So the next reason why you may not want a job as an auditor is that you're going to be required to learn new things often. Now, I often hear people talk about like job interviews. They talk about like, oh, I love to learn new things, or I'm a quick learner. But I think that, there really is something to be said about sometimes it being quite a lot. And what I mean by that is, one thing in public accounting, generally promotions come quickly. In industry accounting roles, you could stay in the same position for 4, 5, 6+ years and not move up if there's not another position available. But with public accounting, that's very different. Usually every year, 2, 3 years, depending on where you're at in your career, you may move up into a more senior position than what you're at now. And while that can be great for career growth and opportunity, it also usually requires developing a new skill set. So within every couple years, you need to have a new skill set to be able to require and understand and perform the job duties of the next level. And usually that's, something that you're learning all while you're getting to that next level. And as soon as you feel like you understand your role, as soon as you understand your role as an intern, as an associate, as a senior, that's when you get bumped up to the next role and there's more stuff to learn. And so that can be very challenging. If you're someone who wants to just go to work, keep their head down, go home, get their paycheck and be done, public accounting might not be the best route for you. There's definitely this kind of mindset of like, up or out. Continue to move up, learn more, get your next promotion, or leave public accounting. And so that's something to consider. And apart from just understanding the job duties, you're going to be working with a variety of different clients. Every client is going to be different. There's going to be lots of things to understand and grasp about individual clients, individual industries. You're going to be working underneath different kinds of people, and every manager oftentimes has their own way they like to do things. Some firms might have certain standardized processes, but there's usually some leniency for managers and partners to, change things how they want. And so, you may be working with a variety of different people at all given times. And so there's always something to be learning. Accounting standards are always constantly changing too, to try to improve the industry, and depending on what's going on in the world, there's always some new accounting standard that comes into play every single year. And so there's always things that are changing from an accounting standpoint, from an auditing standpoint. And so it's just this constant influx of changes. And then on top of those things, we're now moving into a world more with AI. And so a lot of companies are taking those things into consideration. A lot of them are trying to implement new technologies to become more efficient. And so there's a lot of new processes to learn there too, and I'm sure that is not going to stop anytime soon. And so it can be a great opportunity to continue to learn and to grow, but sometimes it can also be challenging and overwhelming. So if that seems like a lot, it is, and it's definitely something to really consider. You're going to learn things in all careers, but public accounting, it really sometimes feels like it could be a fire hose, especially in the very beginning of your career. And so just kind of something to take into consideration that things are always going to be changing and you have to be comfortable with that. And if you're not comfortable with that change, then public accounting might not be the best career path for you. The next thing that I want to talk about that might be a reason not to become an auditor is that your work will be constantly criticized. And what do I mean by that? So oftentimes the way audits work is an individual will complete a portion of their audit over a company, and then all audits go through some type of review process. So you have the person who's preparing the work papers, preparing the documents that they're using to like review a company's financials. And then you'll have someone above you come and review that work and do some type of detailed review, make sure that you've documented everything appropriately, making sure that, you've covered all your bases on whatever you're looking at. And then usually after that detailed reviewer, you'll have a second reviewer or some type of quality reviewer on top of that, who will then look at the work again, but maybe on a less detailed level and a little bit higher level. And then depending on the firm that you work with, you might have even one more set of review after that. And so what that means is, you'll complete, no matter how well you do, there's always room for improvement. And so oftentimes, you'll complete work and you're going to get feedback from your managers, your partners, from quality review teams. and you're going to be asked to correct things. Hopefully they'll tell you some good things that you're doing well too throughout the process, but most of the time you're going to be told that you need to correct a certain amount of things, and it's going to happen with every single job. You're going to be constantly do some work, have it reviewed, get feedback, make corrections, and every person who reviews is a little bit differently. Hopefully you have good professional people who review your work and can give you good feedback. But you do have to expect that you're going to always have to change things and improve things. And so if you're someone that gets very sensitive about the things that you're doing and you don't want someone to tell you that you did something wrong, then auditing is definitely not the right job for you, because kind of like we or as auditors, we're reviewing other people's work and telling them, where their errors, you're kind of pointing out errors, right? And they're going to be pointing out errors of your work as well, in order to make sure that the work that you're doing is solid for like both a financial and, a legal perspective, right? And so all audit work is reviewed by 2 or 3 individuals. You're going to receive feedback, you're going to have to fix things, and you need to have somewhat of a thick skin. It doesn't mean people are going to be yelling at you, hopefully, or anything of that nature, but you do have to understand that you're going to be constantly told things that you're doing incorrectly and that you need to fix. And so if that is something, and that happens to like even the best auditor. I'm not saying that's for some people who just don't know what they're doing. I'm just that, there's always things that get missed. It's just the way it is. And the people above you have more experience, so they know what to look for a little bit more than you do. And so it's just always that way. And so if you're someone who doesn't constantly like to get feedback and has a little bit of a tough time receiving any kind of like criticism of their work, then auditing may be a challenge for you. And so that's something definitely to consider before becoming an auditor. The next point I want to make is kind of plays off one of the previous about, I had mentioned some things about constant change. So auditors oftentimes might be working in a variety of environments. Now, this has changed quite a bit after pre-COVID and post-COVID. So pre-COVID, there was a lot more auditors going to clients on site, going to their offices, going to their locations, reviewing paper files, and doing a variety of work in person. And then during COVID, obviously those things changed. A lot of it was pushed remote. And now post-COVID, it really depends. I've noticed kind of a standard or more of like a trend, a lot less in-person visits to clients. So, maybe instead of going out to a client for a week, you might work from your CPA firm's office for, 3 or 4 of those days, and then maybe just go out to a client site like 1 day a week to meet the client, maybe to review some things that aren't digital. Because that's another thing too. Most things these days have switched to digital. So a lot of times clients are able to provide support via like emails or certain secured portals to keep private information safe, things of that nature. And so the need to go on client site isn't as big anymore as it used to be. And also the amount of travel. So some firms, you might be have a lot of local clients, and so you're just traveling around town close to where you live and close to where your office is. There are other people who might be traveling out of the state, flying often. I talked to an old manager of mine, and he, many years ago, he was working for a CPA firm, and he was traveling quite a bit, like 60% of his time he was traveling. It was quite a lot. Whereas me, I haven't had, like, a lot of my travel time was local, and these days, very little travel. I, primarily work from the office or from home. And so things have changed. Again, it depends on your clientele. It depends on your firm and how, like, where your clients are located. But generally, going back to what I was trying to say here is that one day you might be working from home, one day you might be working from the office, another day you might be going on to a client site. Depending on who your client is, you might get a nice fancy conference room, or you might get like a little back storage file room with a desk set up that you're sitting at. For the most part, in my experience, I've had generally decent setups. But you could be really limited. Your Wi-Fi connection could be poor or good depending on where you're at. It really just depends. And so you may be working in a variety of different environments. Now, for some people, this is great, right? It keeps work from being monotonous. But for other people, this might be really frustrating. If you like really enjoy like your work desk environment, it might feel uncomfortable to go to different places all the time and have to reset up and get situated. So if you're someone who likes to, stay more in one place and do your work and you're more confident that way, then being an auditor might not be the best choice for you. Again, I know some auditors who work completely remotely, completely work from home 100% of the time. And then maybe those are usually special arrangements. So usually like if someone does need to go out to a client, they might have another team member do it. But generally speaking, a lot of the work can be done remotely in some situations, and then other situations you're going to be going out a lot. So again, this really does depend, but definitely something to consider, because definitely auditors move around a lot more than, say, like those who work on the tax side of things, for example. So something to consider. May not be the best job for you if you're not comfortable with that constant change. So the next thing I want to talk about with being an auditor to consider is that you'll be talking a lot with other people, a lot with other clients. So, I think sometimes people picture these accountants, right, like cartoon style, glasses, pencil behind the ear, pocketbook, calculator, things like that. But times are definitely have changed. Most things are done on Excel. And especially with more and more technology, accounting is getting away from data entry more and more and more, and more focused in on relationships and advisement, and auditing. There's some separation between being an advisor versus performing in an assurance role, in which you're have to have independence, but that's a topic for another conversation. But what I'm going at here is that really you kind of do need to be a people person, probably more so than some people realize, when you're considering a job in the accounting field and in auditing in particular, because one, you're a client facing role, you're serving a variety of clients. And so you're going to be speaking with like CFOs and CEOs of companies. You're going to be talking with other accounting personnel. You may be talking with other like department managers and things, depending on, where you're working on. So you're going to be talking to a lot of different people on a constant basis, whether that be from emails, phone calls, in-person visits. And so it's super important to be able to have a good ability to speak with other people and to kind of build those relationships with other people. And in addition to your clients, you're also going to have your other team members, right? So you're going to have your partners of the firm, your managers, your seniors, other interns, associates. Usually auditors aren't just working individually, they work in teams. So, an auditor, sure, they get like individual sections, certain work that they're in charge of performing individually, but an audit as a whole is usually a team effort. And so you have several team members and they're all working on different pieces of the puzzle and bringing it together. And so there's a lot of balance between like working with your team members and working with clients, keeping up good communication via email and having good email practices, being able to pick up the phone. I know a lot of people don't like talking on the phone these days. And that may be required. And then, being able to go to clients, being able to take clients out to lunch and, build good relationships with them and being able to advise them. You're going to have to go up to clients and ask them difficult questions occasionally about some of their numbers, and ask probing questions to understand some of the financial data. And so if you're someone that really doesn't like talking to people, auditing is not the job for you. Absolutely not. If you want to be able to do your work and just ignore people all day and not talk to anyone, do not become an auditor. Now, what I do like about auditing is it's a professional environment. Like, you're working with businesses, you're working with business professionals. Hopefully there is some level of professionalism that's a little bit different than, say, if you're working with people off the street, like in hospitality. Nothing against hospitality folks or like people who are attending those things, but just there is a certain level of professionalism, which is good. But yeah, if you don't like talking to people, if you're not willing to talk to people, if you don't want to talk to people while at work, then auditing is actually not a good job for you. So that's definitely something to consider as well. And then the last but not least thing that I want to discuss about why you may not want to become an auditor is about charge hours. So what are charge hours? So as in a CPA firm, you have a variety of clients and you're charging them for the work that you perform. And so, you're being paid a certain salary from your company, and then the company is billing clients per hour for each hour of your work. And it's going to be a lot. So maybe they're charging, and I'm just making up a number here, but we're saying for your work, your charge rate is like $150 an hour. So you work on 10 hours on a client, so that's $1,500 worth that is being charged to a client. And a portion of that ends up going to you and your salary. A portion goes to the overhead of the firm, things of that nature. Well, the thing is with charge hours is you have this kind of double-edged sword, because the idea is, in one respect, the more hours that you work, the more hours get to be charged to clients and the more money the CPA firm makes, right? But the more hours that you work on a job, that means they're also paying you more on a salary. So ultimately what a firm wants is they want you to be able to work a very small hours on a lot of different jobs where like their cost is low, but they get a lot of jobs, so they're making lots of revenues with hours on a variety of jobs. And so basically what ends up happening is with each job you get a budget, and those budgets tell you how many hours that you're supposed to spend on each one of your jobs. And then hopefully you're able to do your work in the allotted budget and move on, which is great. But often what ends up happening is you'll have a certain amount of hours that you're required to work, certain budgets that you have to meet, like as a whole, as an individual. So you need to make certain hours, but then you also want to keep the amount of hours that you're working on an individual job as low as possible to keep costs low so that the firm's happy. And this can be a real struggle. Budgets can be a real struggle that are talked about by accountants often, where, they feel like the budget isn't big enough. They feel like, things take a lot longer than the firm says that they should take, and there's that stress there. Sometimes you have this thing called eating time, where people will do work but not record the work because they feel like they're going to get in trouble because they spent more hours on a budget, which is hopefully something that you'll never have to do. But there can be a lot of pressure there about like getting work done quickly, and making the firm happy while also getting the work done and getting your hours in and making sure you're working enough hours too. Like some firms want you to work a certain amount of hours per month, but then they don't want you to work too many hours on a particular job. And so anyway, I hope that is clear. I guess I'm rambling a little bit here, but I just, there's a lot of stress about, getting hours in and charging clients, and also like things like, you have to track your time. Like you're supposed to be tracking your time throughout the day. In an industry job, you're working 8 hours, you get some work done, you go home, but you're not tracking meticulously. Like I'm constantly keeping track, like, okay, I worked 30 minutes on this client, and then maybe I worked an hour on this other client, or maybe I worked the whole day on this one client, but I spent, 2 hours on this one project, and then I spent 45 minutes doing this other thing for this client, and it gets charged differently. And so it's something that you have to like constantly be doing. I feel like even in my regular life too, like I feel like I'm constantly looking at the clock, like, okay, how much time did I spend on this task? Just because I'm so used to doing that. And like a job, I feel like it bleeds into my personal life too. But that can be stressful for some people, like having to track your time all the time, what you're doing throughout the day so that things get charged correctly, making sure you're charging enough, or like making sure you're working enough, making sure that you're trying to make people happy. And like going on with stress with just hours, it's just stressful too, to like try to meet clients' expectations, trying to meet your individual manager's expectations, trying to meet your own expectations. There's just a lot going on. There's a lot of deadlines. And so there's just a lot of different pressures, like accounting, huge deadlines, huge pressures on budgets, huge pressures on different expectations from like clients and different people you're working with. You might be working on several jobs at a time, because sometimes jobs bleed into the other. Like if you're working on one job for 2 or 3 weeks and then you start another one, but the first one hasn't stopped yet, or you're not done, then you might be doing 2 jobs, and then there might be a third and a fourth. If you have smaller jobs, you might have more jobs over the course of the time. If you have a bigger job, you might be just working on one client all year, depending on if you work at some like the big Fortune 500 companies, or like work on those kinds of jobs. So it's just very different how those things are done. So it really depends, but there just are a lot of stressors. And so these are 6 tips. I hope that they were helpful to you. And if you enjoyed this video and are interested in learning more about accounting, please check out some of my other videos.